Okay, well, it's 12:01. We'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to this session, Rise and Basic Needs Security. Again, my name is Ken O'Rennick. I am a faculty member in the College of DuPage Library, and I'm serving as moderator for this session. Our presenters will be taking questions after their presentations, so feel free to use the chat box to add your questions anytime during the presentation. Today we have a special presentation from RISE, a national nonprofit organization founded in 2017, focused on the primary goal of making college more affordable and accessible. Presenting around the topic of basic needs insecurity in higher education are Jemere Calhoun, California Director of the Student Navigator Network at RISE, and Mike Gray, Operations Manager of the Student Navigator Network at RISE. They will be doing an overview of basic needs and security, talking about how RISE has created a program to help address student basic needs across the country and move into some recommendations that they have for students, professors, and staff and administration. I'll now turn things over to Jemere and Mike.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ken, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mike. I am the operations manager. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. Everybody can see my screen. We're good? Perfect. Awesome. So as Ken introduced us to talk about basic needs and security, and we're going to talk about the Student Navigator Network. That's our program that we created about almost 2 years ago now. Started around March of 2020 and then into really launching nationally in June. And so, excuse me, I kind of have a little tickle. And so we are going to get started in the introduction. So what are we going to talk about today? Very briefly, we're going to talk about basic needs and security. That's going to take a good portion of our time. We're going to review in-depth sort of an overview of basic needs and security. Jemere will be covering that portion. And then we'll talk a little bit about the Student Navigator Network and what we're doing to address student basic needs across the country and how folks can get involved with the Student Navigator Network and other ways that you can get involved. All right. So before we get into everything, let me just do a little brief overview of who are we? Why are we here today? We appreciate the invites by the College of DuPage to go over basic needs and security a little bit more in depth outside of just food insecurity. And RISE is our parent organization. And as mentioned in the introduction, our overall mission is to make higher education affordable and accessible. And RISE has done a lot of work around making college affordable and accessible. And part of that goal has been sort of these three different vision points here: free tuition and fees at public colleges and universities, support to graduate on time with little to no debt, and then that final one there, support to end college basic needs and security. And that's more specifically where the Student Navigator Network is focused. We do have RISE in and of itself does have other, Jemere?
Mike, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but for right now, the screen is totally white.
So it is, okay, that's bizarre.
I can see your mouse, but the screen is told. There it is. All right.
Thank you. Okay, perfect. I appreciate that, Jemere. I don't know why I clicked on sharing and here we are still years later into doing this. So here's that wonderful picture that I was sort of referring to and talking about here. Appreciate that, Jemere. If there's any other technical issues, feel free, anybody, let us know in the chat. Yeah, so RISE also does other advocacy efforts around free college and making it more accessible. And so we've done a lot of work on the organizing and advocacy side in a lot of states like California, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia as well. And so there's that sort of section of RISE, and then the other section that works with the same mission of making college affordable and accessible, in particular addressing student basic needs. Who are we, the SNN team? So you have two of us here today, actually three of us here today, two of us presenting, Jemere, myself, and then we have Rebecca Rodriguez, and then we are led by the wonderful Dr. Stacy Raphael. She's the Director of Case Management and the overall Student Navigator Network. She actually started with the ideation of the Student Navigator Network all the way in April of 2020, and then led the national efforts and continues to lead our new approach. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into the Student Navigator Network. So without further ado, let me go ahead and pass this over to my colleague and friend, Jemere Calhoun, to talk about basic needs and security.
Hello, everyone. So we're going to talk a little bit about basic needs, insecurity, and a couple of issues surrounding that a lot of our students are currently facing. Here we see a more expansive definition of basic needs. Basic needs is more than just being housing insecure, food insecure. It covers a lot of situations. Access to nutritious and sufficient food, safe and secure adequate housing, healthcare, mental health, physical well-being, affordable technology that includes having the proper technology to be a productive student, laptops, access to Wi-Fi, hygiene, childcare, and many, many more related needs. So this is our expansive definition that we use to cover student basic needs, just because a lot of these issues kind of go under the radar. And we're going to talk more about how they're all are intersected and interconnected, and how they can impact student productivity. Here we talk about basic needs relationships, and this talks about the intersections of basic needs insecurity. We could have a student who may be food insecure, and they lack the transportation to be able to go to the supermarket and bring the food back. Then they lack the funds to achieve that transportation. So understanding how interconnected all these issues are and how they can affect students is very important in how we try to address these insecurities. We cannot give a solution that causes another problem or causes more anxiety on a student in order to receive that solution. So this just kind of gives us a way to think about this in a more broader text. And here are some of our specific definitions when we talk about food insecurity. Not being able to have nutritious food, finding food from sources that are not safe for human consumption. Those type of things can lead to someone being food insecure. Housing insecure is not having a consistent place to live. There is a quite technical term called couch surfing. Some people may not be, they may not necessarily be able to understand that term right off the bat. Essentially, it means that you don't have a permanent place to live, and that you are going from one house to another. You may be sleeping on your cousin's couch. Your uncle may let you stay a couple of nights there, but you do not have a permanent residence of your own. And homelessness means that you do not have a fixed, regular place to live, place to sleep. You could be sleeping in places that are inadequate for human dwelling. You could be sleeping in your car and other issues like that. We try to make sure that we're very clear on these definitions, and also how to be responsive and sensitive to students' needs. Now that we've covered what, now let's talk about the why and the who. In this blurb right here, you can see that there has been studied, especially from our friends at the Temple University Hope Center. Nearly 3 in 5 have experienced basic needs insecurity. So if you think about your campus, that's 60% of your students have faced some type of basic needs insecurity. And especially when we talk about community colleges, food insecurity affected. Almost 40% of students are facing food insecurity. And nearly half of our students are housing insecure. One of the biggest things that we see here, we talk about the black and white gap. And especially when we talk about the black and white gap, we also talk about minority, and marginalized gaps. 16 percentage points between Black and white basic needs insecurities. And that means that a lot of our Black students, our marginalized students, our LGBTQ community, our Hispanic community are suffering way behind their current white counterparts. And that is a big issue when we talk about higher education. Now, why do basic needs matter? The biggest reason why they matter is because this is an issue of social justice. We talk about students, we use a lot of keywords, but the biggest thing is that they are people first and students second. So we have to be able to reach the person, find out what's going on with the person, because basic needs insecurity can negatively impact a lot of people's lives. It could cause a rise in stress, unhealthy eating habits. You may hoard food, or you may eat at different times where it may be kind of socially undesirable to eat. This could interfere with your confidence, interfere with your relationships with your peers, with school administrators, staff, and faculty. It could just really make you feel not belonging on campus. So we have to understand why this matters is because we are trying to reach the person. We look at this in a holistic way to make sure that the person is getting what they need in order to be a productive student. And again, why does this matter? Why does it matter that we're trying to take an approach to be sensitive and cognizant and aware of not just what a student needs, but how it impacts them? Because students face multiple barriers to getting the assistance that they need. There is a stigma and shame around asking for need, going to a food pantry, going to a food bank, standing in line at a clothing closet. There's a stigma there that affects a lot of students negatively. Another thing, some campuses may have a lot of resources, but they're not centralized resources. So a student gets sent to one department, gets sent to another department. They may receive some help there and may receive some help in another place. But oftentimes what we see is students may get discouraged. After that first time of going to a department and they send them to another department, they may say, you know what, forget it, and just go home. And in that same vein, sometimes students may receive duplicated resources depending on the different groups that they're connected with. And while we want students to receive as much help as possible, duplication of services can give students assistance that they don't need, that they already have. And also it could stop another student from receiving that aid that they need. So these are some of the barriers that we want to knock down to students receiving the assistance that they need. And who is most impacted by B&I? Earlier, when I was talking about the Black and white gap, I brought up a couple of things, but these are the students on our campus who are mostly affected by this. Our Black, Indigenous, people of color, our LGBTQ community, our parenting students, our students who may be coming back to college after doing so many different things in their lives, or maybe coming to college as parents, as adults, Pell eligible students, students who are receiving financial aid, first generation students, and students formerly in foster care, and students impacted by the criminal justice system. These are just a couple of groups that are affected most by basic needs insecurity. And the biggest reason why is because there just aren't enough services to A, identify, and B, reach these students. Now, we talked about all of these different things and what type of effects do they have on us. Basic needs insecurity can have effects on the body. If you don't have a habitable place to sleep, you could suffer from fatigue that gives you headaches. You can't focus. You feel it in your body, and if you feel it in your body, And while you're trying to sit in a chair, listen to an instructor speak in the front of the class, and your head hurts, and maybe your stomach hurts, maybe because you haven't eaten nutritious food, or maybe you haven't eaten at all. Just think about those physical feelings you may feel while you're in class. And when we talk about those physical feelings, they add to our mood. If you're feeling hungry, maybe you may have anxiety because you're thinking about your next meal. You may be irritable or angry, and that could cause some problems between your peers and your instructors. You can't motivate in class, your restlessness. You could be thinking about all these issues, and it creates sadness or depression. So you are not the 100% student that you can be. And with that on the mood, sometimes it's going to affect your behavior. You can exercise less often, and then that contributes to the negative feelings of your body. You can be socially withdrawn. You don't want to talk to your friends because they're going out to get boba and orange chicken, and you can't afford it, and you don't want to be the one sitting there. So that can make you socially withdrawn. Angry outbursts, you're upset with your professor, you're not feeling good, your professor makes a comment about you not paying attention, angry outbursts. And as we talked about earlier, overeating or undereating. Sometimes students who may not have the proper resources to achieve food in safe ways, they may hoard and binge. So when they do have food, they keep it close to them. They want it there, and then they eat it at one time. Or sometimes under eating, just not being able to eat as much as possible. And this can contribute to eating in class, which contributes to more situations, negative impacts between the student and the instructor. So I hope we covered a lot of those bases of basic needs and left us all with some things to think about, how we can take away some of the stigma and shame surrounding it, and also find ways to help our students and even our staff and faculty address basic needs insecurity. So I just want to thank you for allowing me that time to discuss those issues. And at this time, we will transition to the introduction of our Student Navigator Network with our operations manager, Mike Gray. Thank you.
Thank you, Jemere. Thank you. Thank you for the overview of basic needs. And as I know Ken put a little bit ago, if you do have any questions or comments, other supports that you'd like to share, please feel free to drop those in the chat. And then, we'll have a chance to address those questions near the end. So let me go into this. All right, so we're going to be talking a little bit about the Student Navigator Network. I know I mentioned it early on in the beginning. It was started in March 2020, and it was pretty much started as a volunteer sort of service. And so Dr. Stacy Raphael and a few other folks on the RISE team and other volunteers that worked with RISE pretty much opened this online portal, and it was through Google Sheets at the time. And thousands and thousands and thousands of students were asking for assistance. And prior to that too, along with the Student Navigator Network, there was a partnership with another organization, and they were providing pretty much $50 gas card or $50 food cards. And then they realized, wow, $50 food cards, we were running out. That wasn't really addressing the need. Students needed more than $50 at one point. $50 wasn't going to cover the rent for the month or the months. $50 wasn't going to supplement the income that many people lost when they lost their jobs at the start of the pandemic. And $50 is not going to provide that nutritious food that Jemere was talking about and that we've talked about all throughout the day at a lot of the sessions. So then came about this idea of hiring students across the country. So I served as one of those 10 student navigators, and I had 9 other peers and colleagues across the country from all over the states, meeting one-on-one with students, finding resources at a state, local, and federal level to support students that were writing in about all kinds of things. Some folks needed assistance with rent, finding, rent relief. Other folks needed assistance with finding transportation. Even so, others needed assistance with technology for the university, or finding a way to leverage more financial aid. accessing public benefits, so a myriad of different services. And all of us as student navigators were sort of trained to then serve as an advocate for them and college students across the country, but also trained to teach them how to navigate and advocate for themselves. And so that's why we're called navigators. It's a little bit about, why it's a student navigator. In sort of the first year and continuing on into this next year, so this is our second year, we were able to serve over 10,000 students from all the 50 states, representing 1,500 different institutions. And so that was sort of the original initial approach. We built out an entire case management system. We have a CRM system where we keep track of, all of our communications with students, resources. So we've built out from going from sheets to a large scalable system. And that's exactly where we're at now. Now we're expanding, and we started within, the latter part of last year, expanding to individual schools and programs. And so we have a program at the University of Southern California, USC. And then with that, we have a sort of like mini built-in program with a nonprofit called Foster Nation, who focuses on providing food to folks that experience foster care system in California. And our main goal with that program is to connect folks. As navigators, we connect them to public benefits, and we're trained to go through SNAP, or in our case in California, CalFresh SNAP applications, and we help students, fill out those applications, advocate on their behalf with, the county or however, a student needs us to assist. And so that's what that program in particular is really focused on, bridging the gap of food insecurity and having sort of a temporary, so Foster Nation offers like a temporary sort of assistance, and then Rise with the Student Navigator Network, we are there to supplement and figure out a more long-term solution with food security. We also had a program at University of Wisconsin-Madison. Central Michigan University is our newest one so far. And they are our first RSO, or student-led program. So for students on this call, in this meeting, if you are interested in bringing a Student Navigator Network to your campus, you feel like there's a need after learning a little bit more about it, definitely feel free to ask questions, of course, in the chat, but also feel free to connect with us afterwards, and we can talk about how we can do that together. So what exactly are we? I know I talked a little bit about, how we got started and what we're planning on doing. We're a peer-to-peer program with two main goals. The first and foremost goal is to provide the customized, personalized case management using a peer model. And that's for undergraduates and graduate students alike. Any student that really writes to us, we don't turn away. We're here to support students in addressing their basic needs and security. A sort of twofold goal that folds into that, because we are a peer-to-peer case management model, we also provide employment and professional development or growth opportunities for college students, both undergraduate and graduate students. So graduate and undergraduate students get the opportunity to serve as those student navigators on their campuses as a program coordinator for their Student Navigator Network campus, program on their campus. And so we provide those opportunities. If you're not familiar with case management, I know there's a picture over here off to the side, and as you notice, it's circular, but it's also iterative, meaning we may start, determining needs and strengths, developing a plan, going ahead, locating those resources, navigating, and then reassessing. And we may, solve one sort of issue that students focused on, and then we work on the next. As Jemere mentioned, with basic needs and security relationships, they're very interconnected. So we may focus on whatever primary issue the student has expressed as their priority issue that they would like to work on with us, and then we move to whatever is next. In some cases as well, we've addressed the problem as it is for the time being, and then maybe if something else happens to that student, maybe they were, employment secure, and then 4 months, 5 months later, they lost their job or had a cut in hours. Now they need more assistance to help supplement that. So they'll come back and work with their student navigator to find those resources to supplement that employment income that they lost. And as a sort of definition over here, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I think the main key part here of case management is it's extremely collaborative. It's not the student navigator doing everything. As I mentioned, It's not me just sending a list of resources. That's like a lot of colleges and institutions. That's the capacity they have, is they'll just post like a resource list. We are not posting resource lists. We're not sending a whole list of resources to students. We want to make sure it's tailored to that particular student and their situation. And we want to make sure that they know that there is somebody on the other end working with them collaboratively, providing resources, talking with them, working through a plan, listening to how they would like to prioritize. And so at the central, I guess, center or core of the case management model that we have with the peer-to-peer is there is a direct relationship that's integral, and that's with the student collaborating very closely with the student navigator. And so that relationship is prioritized and it's core to the work that we do. Why do we go with peer-to-peer? This sort of graphic here shows the primary reasons. Peers, as research shows, are more relatable. It's more likely and goes into greater utilization. More likely a student is going to use a resource, especially because of stigma and shame, in particular with basic needs and security. Students are going to go to students and they feel comfortable talking about their issues and the problems that they're facing and need help with. Peers also have the largest influence on each other. So if a peer is using, the CAP center or using the food pantry and they talk about it with another peer, that peer is most likely to go visit those resources compared to when, maybe a professional staff member would mention it, or a professor, or even a family member. Peers are also their strongest advocates. You all are on the ground. You are a peer. You know what students are facing. You are around friends. You are around colleagues if you work as a student. And so you know what's going on. You have a better lay of the land than administration, than professional staff members. And so you are integral in this process. And so that's why with the peer-to-peer case management model, you have that power to make that difference and be a part of that process and advocate for that. And that's what we're here for. And that's one of our main goals. And then, as mentioned, greater utilization of services. What does our framework look like? I know Jemere mentioned this, so I'll just kind of review some of these. We focus on holistic. And so we are not just focused on food insecurity. We're not just focused on housing insecurity. We're focused on what are the issues that students are facing. And that's a myriad of different things. And it depends on the student. So we don't have a one size sort of fits everything model with working with a student. We have a process, and the student really gets to take control and decide the direction of the support that they receive from the student navigator. We are also provide extensive training on these 3 areas and many, many more: cultural competence, strengths-based, and trauma-informed. Part of what we've talked about throughout this entire sort of day as well is the need for students, and this was in the keynote, the need for students to retell and retell and retell. With duplication of services, that's what's happening. Students are retelling their story. They have to, quote unquote, like perform their poverty to be able to receive these basic need resources. And so we have trained our navigators to ask the right questions and to make sure that, whenever we are receiving information to help a student, that we ourselves are documenting that and we have that in a centralized location. So we're not re-asking the same questions. We're not transferring a student over to somebody else every single time to where they're going to have to share their story. And one of the primary tenets too of the program is strengths-based. And I think that's very important. A lot of sometimes resources can be, deficit-based, and we focus on we're not asking like what's wrong with you as a student. We're saying what's happened to you. And then along those lines, what supports and resources and services do you have access to in your community, at your institution, in your state, at the federal level? Let's utilize your strengths and your resources and your supports to help you. And if you don't have some in some areas, we're going to help find those resources and supports to help you. And so we operate from that strengths-based perspective. And then kind of ending our sort of conversation with the Student Navigator Network, and we'll touch a little bit on recommendations. I know we're short on time here. Our impact. So as mentioned, we served over 10,000 students and continually launching new programs to serve more students. And we had a self-reported student retention rate of 84%. And so we sent out surveys to all the students that we helped and asked them, like, was the help that you received, did that help, in making that decision for you re-enrolling? And this was a critical time period, especially during the pinnacle of COVID in 2020 and into 2021. And this retention rate was higher than a lot of, other institutions across the nation and across the national average. 50% felt more knowledgeable and felt like they could actually navigate resources. And that's the other piece of our program, is making sure that we are setting students up for success outside of just the help that, we're helping them with. We want them to be able to do this for themselves and potentially even, help peers as they're, navigating those relationships and navigating the college climate. And then we are able to help secure, self-reportedly by students, over $1 million in benefits and emergency aid. And so this took the many different forms. It could be public benefits, it could be emergency aid, it could be financial aid adjustments, grants, either for micro grants or rent relief grants. And I just want to sort of leave you with this quote here. I won't read it, but this quote was submitted by a student. We have lots of powerful testimonies, and that's really why I love the work that I'm doing, and why we find a lot of value in the work that we're doing with students across the country. So let's talk a little bit about some recommendations here for students. A few not recommendations, but ways that you can get involved. Advocate for those basic needs programs. If you're interested in this and you see a need, advocate for these programs at your campus. Talk to administrators, talk to anybody that you can. I know that was something we talked about when if you went to the policy one. Make noise, right? And so continue to show up. If this is something you need, administration will listen to you. You have the power and you are the voice, and that's why students and student voice is so powerful in this realm and in many others. If you already have maybe basic needs programs, but you don't have something like the Student Navigator Network, and that's something that interests you, if you want to bring that to your campus, connect with us. We'd love to talk to you and see what's on your campus and how we might be able to supplement or complement the stuff that your campus is doing. Also, you can start student organizations or community organizations and hold like food drives and hold other initiatives to increase the capacity across your campus in the basic needs realm. Professors, if there's any professors on here, some recommendations for you. Adding a syllabus statement about basic needs and security and where they can get help. So familiarizing yourself with your own campus resources is extremely helpful. And that will help you be able to navigate, and help students as well. Rethinking rules around eating in the classroom if you're able to, and that makes sense for your class. Rethinking that, and you never know that might be the only opportunity that students have to get that meal, because they're working multiple jobs or they're going from class to class to class. And just education around basic needs in general and how you can help students. And then I will end sort of here. Recommendations for staff and administration. We talked a little bit about this too in the keynote. Low to no barrier access point. Stop asking students to pretty much beg for assistance. If a student is there at the food pantry, they likely need the food assistance. And so having that low to no barrier access point will increase the availability and accessibility of those resources to students, as well as make sure, if you have the opportunity, engage in SNAP and TANF and UI awareness on campus, and redefine what it is and how you meet student basic needs. If maybe you address basic needs and you think of basic needs as only food insecurity and housing insecurity, how can you take on a more expansive definition to support students? And so these are some of the recommendations, and we'll definitely, I know we're right at the question point, so I'll go ahead and stop and allow for any other questions or inputs. Feel free to definitely connect with us too afterwards. I know I posted about it, and I'll go ahead and drop our emails. Thank you for giving us this time. Ken, thank you for moderating this, and look forward to answering some questions.
Thank you so much. This has been truly enlightening, the overview of BNI and all of the good, solid work that the Student Navigator program is doing. So thank you. And yes, we have time for questions. So you can either put your questions in the chat box, or I think that you should be able to unmute yourself. And if you'd like to just join a conversation here and ask a question or make a comment, that would be terrific. So I'll give you a second to formulate any thoughts. And while you're doing that, I'm just curious. I'm going to throw a quick question out there to you, the presenters. You talked about case management. And it sounds like there's a lot of moving parts within case management. And so I would like to know, are the students responsible for the majority of that sort of work of doing all of the points discussed in case management? And also, what sort of training do the navigators receive in order to operationalize all of these good works?
Those are all great questions, and I'll touch a little bit on that and see if Mike has anything to add. But yes, our navigators receive peer-to-peer case management training. We train in a number of different areas. Some of those areas Mike talked about when we talk about holistic caring, strength-based approach, trauma-informed care, and our overall peer-to-peer case management model. Our trainings are developed in according to some trainings that we have all received from our director, Dr. Stacy Raphael, and as well as our I can say our deputy director, who's also with us here, Rebecca Rodriguez. Big shout out. So we do comprehensive training. And we just take a holistic look at it. There's a lot of feedback going back and forth, and it's an awesome thing. Go ahead and jump in, Mike, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, so case management does have a lot of pieces to it, and so starting with having that initial assessment. It's a very low barrier initial assessment. It's done by the student. The student, like I said, is completely in control. In terms of the actual sort of case management procedures, that's where the student navigator is trained. So most of that work is the student navigator. The student pretty much comes in and informs the student navigator, this is where I'm at now, this is where I am, this is what I need help with, and how can we work together to figure this out. And so a part of that too, like I mentioned, is the student navigator is not just sending a resource list every month of just a whole bunch of stuff. We're working with that student at the pace of that student. And sometimes, we recognize that students are busy, and so they do miss meetings. And we are aware of that. In terms of like the training, very typical training. I mean, we talk on a lot of topics, helping skills. And we're continuing to grow out our training as well as we speak. And part of this too is for the student navigators, we also provide training on making sure that they are taking care of themselves. I mean, as most people know, basic needs is can be very intense. And I've helped a lot of students, and I myself have been puzzled with some of the sort of cases that I've, had to help address. And in some cases too, as maybe many of you know, if you work in this realm or other realms, sometimes there's just nothing we can do about a situation. But that doesn't mean we don't try, and we exhaust whatever we can. We don't ever give up. And so sometimes that can be a little taxing. So we do talk, when we talk about sort of levels of support, student navigators, of course, we have a network of student navigators that communicate with each other. So it's not isolated. Even if you're at different schools, we are very intentional about making sure that we have that student navigator community, as well as we make sure that we have times, and we have those discussions in group meetings as well as individual meetings. And we do go over topics such as like vicarious trauma. So, taking on sort of, sometimes helping students can either re-trigger something in yourself if you've had personal experience. And so we talk about, let's understand what this is, and let's understand how can we help, when that arises, who do we talk to? So we set up this sort of layer of support within our own program and within the programs that we have across the country to support the student navigators too, because they need support as well, when working with some of these difficult cases.
That's so great to hear that you're taking into consideration the own health of the navigators, and that in anybody who is engaged in any sort of social justice activities and social work knows that it can be a big burden, a big cost to those who are in those support positions. We still have about 4 or 5 more minutes for questions, and I see a couple that have come up in chat. One is there a cost associated with partnering with your organization?
So as of right now, due to awesome grant partners over the last couple of years, there is no cost to either you, the individual, or the institution to partner with our organization. We have several different models of partnering with us, and also creating a Student Navigator network of your own. So essentially, if we're talking about an institution, your school wants to bring a Student Navigator network there, the only real conversations around finances that we will be talking about is trying to take advantage of federal work study to pay students. We are very big in case management and helping students, but we're also very big in making sure students, our own students, our navigators, can also take care of their needs. We're all about giving students jobs and making sure students, are prepared in that sense. So there is no cost to the individual or the institution for partnering with our organization. There's different ways that it can be done, and we would love to have more of those conversations. So to answer that, once again, no cost to you.
That's terrific to hear that there are few barriers, few to none, that I'm hearing with respect financially. We have another question. Thank you for that answer. But we have another question here. What is the typical caseload for a navigator?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take that one on. So as a student navigator, I would say it's very different when we look at it from a national level to sort of the scaled individual institutional level. So when I was a navigator, I don't even have a specific number for you. We pretty much, we were playing sort of catch up and trying to help students. But as a typical sort of caseload, it's really hard to put a number on it. Like I can't say, 20 to 30 per this. I can tell you that student navigators only work a certain amount of time. They're not employed full time. Usually it's between 10 to 20 hours. And once again, like Jemere said, it really depends on the institutional need and where sometimes the institution wants to launch the program. Sometimes they want to focus maybe on a particular community or subset of students. Sometimes they want to just focus completely on the entire institutional population. And so we try to make sure that we hire navigators based on that. So we're not just, having, if possible, if the institution can with federal work study positions and through, support with RISE, have more navigators, like 4, we would totally be open to that, to increasing the capacity of student navigators. We never want it to be where one student navigator is helping thousands of students, because we know that's pretty much a lot of times too what happens with staff members that do case management. And so the typical caseload really does vary and depends. And along those lines, we would potentially, if we saw the need and were able to with capacity and resources, we would increase the amount of navigators as needed. And not directly related to this question, but I do want to throw this out there. I know we're pretty much at time. I also want to put out there that the Student Navigator Network and the student navigators themselves, we do not provide mental health resources, or excuse me, mental health services. Nobody is trained in that area. We would defer to your campus professionals that are hired and licensed by your state to provide those services. We also do not provide academic advisement or career services. So we of course, in any way, we would refer students to either campus-based resources, community-based resources, or national state level resources. But that's not really the area that we're trained in. And we know that there are really fantastic people usually on campuses that are dedicated to providing those services. And we're not here to take away institutional resources We're here to supplement and complement and be able to increase the institution's capacity with helping students and in particular addressing their student basic needs. So I appreciate that question. I know that was kind of a half answer almost. If you want to set up a time to directly dive a little bit more into that specific to your institution, we'd love to be able to do that.
Mike Ray, Jemere, Calhoun, thank you so much. This has been a terrific presentation. A virtual thank you. We really appreciate your thoughts and sharing your experiences. So we are at time, just a minute beyond. So everyone can now head back into WOVA to access our final session of the day, where we'll hear closing remarks and reflect on the day's events. So again, thank you so much.